In this module, we will be covering construction math and going a little bit deeper in measuring length of different items. The objective of this section, after you're completing it, you should be able to name the common length measurement tools and the use for them to measure lengths accurately. And that is extremely important in this industry, measuring something to be accurate at all times, not some of the time, but knowing exactly what you're measuring. So you should be able to describe English and metric rulers using them correctly to measure lengths. You should be able to describe English and metric measuring tapes using them accurately to measure lengths. There's a performance test, and you would go through, and we'll try to get that done next week using um, a measuring tape to measure lumber pieces. So I will have multiple pieces that you have to measure accurately. I already know what the length of them will be. And for this test you would go through, you would have to verify, make sure your numbers come up to what I have. Also, you should be able to use a measuring tape measuring a room size space in both English and metric units, using a measuring tape to determine the short side of measuring in both English and metric units. And lastly, you should be able to add English measurements that include fractions. Some of the terms that you need to go over, please read it in your book, go over it, try to understand it. I will cover this at this point. But load bearing basically is just a term we use in construction where there's a wall that is supporting something above it. For example, it could be the roof, or it could be beams or joists, but something that is has a load of weight on it. It says here carrying a significant amount of weight and or providing necessary structural support. A load-bearing wall typically carries some portion of the roof weight and cannot be removed without risking structural failure or collapse. So in other words, a load-bearing wall is supporting everything else above it. If you remove that wall, the house can probably, or the building going to cave in. So never ever remove a bearing wall unless you know what you're doing. You want to support it to change some things out. A stud is uh, usually it's wooden, but it can be metal. It is the vertical support. It's what's supporting the top plate and the bottom plate of a wall. So it's a vertical support inside the wall, which the wall finish material is attached to. In other words, we put drywall on these studs. So the base of the stud rests on a horizontal base plate, which we call the bottom plate or the top plate. Joists is what support the floors or the ceilings. So a joist is um, lumber, and it is usually laid on its side, on the narrow side, and it will support um, the floors or the ceiling. Now this is looking at a ruler. We talked about this already in class, but we're going to look at what it actually measurements. And any ruler is basically used to measure lengths, but to measure it accurately, you need to know how that ruler is set up. So if you look at this ruler, if you want to know what is graduated in other words, the segments, the little lines, we call it graduations or little segments. Each of them are equal in size from each other, but it tells you how that ruler is graduated or the fractions of that ruler. In other words, anything less than 1 inch would be a fraction. So if we look at this, that first number says 1/16. How did they know that? All you need to do is count the number of spaces. So if you start from the very beginning and count the spaces from the beginning to 1, you should count 16 spaces. So it's just that easy. It is actually 1/16 of an inch. So the next line would be 2/16. The next one will be 3/16, and so forth. Uh, and um, and that will give you a lot more information how a ruler is put together. In other words, if you want to measure something accurately, just count the spaces and just know what the total number of spaces within that 1 inch. And so this ruler simplify each one of those numbers. So you see 1/16, the next one it says 1/8. However, it is actually 2/16. But if I reduce that um, 2/16 to its lowest form, it will be 1/8. 1/8. So again, we see 1/4, 1/4. If you count it, it is actually 4/16. And if I reduce it to its lowest form, it would be reduced to 1/4. How do I know that? If I count the number of spaces, it's 4, so it's 4/16. And then I can reduce it by 4 going to that 4 one times, that's the numerator, and 4 going to 16 4 times. And that's how I came up with 1/4, because reducing it to its lowest form, The same thing with 1/2, the same thing with 3/4, because 3/4 is actually 12/16. 12/16. And if I reduce it down to its simplest form, it will be 3/4. So when we're looking at a metric ruler, it's very simple. Everything in the metric system is 10. So if you count the number of spaces, it will be 10. There's 10 millimeters and 1 centimeter. Again, there's 10 millimeters and 1 centimeter. There's 10 centimeters in 1 decameter, or there's 10 decameters in 1 meter. So if I look at it, millimeters are tiny. Again, in that first where it says centimeters, each one of those are millimeters, and that first mark where you see 1 is 1 centimeter. So there's 10 millimeters and 1 centimeter. So it makes it very simple to see. Just count it, and it should be 10. This is 5. Keep going to this point. Spaces, it would be 10 spaces within that 1 centimeter. So millimeters. So everything is division by 10. Everything. Metric system is pretty simple. So if you really look at it, there would be 1,000 millimeters in a meter. There's 100 centimeters in a meter. And it keep on going, 10 decameters in a meter. So if you look at meters, everything is division by 10 to make it as simple as possible to understand. The metric system is fairly easy because you don't have no fractions like we have with American English rulers. So if we're measuring something in an English ruler, if you look, it's measuring from end of the stud to the end of the stud. It came up to 16 inches. Now, if you look at a measuring tape, uh, if you notice when it's in English scale, every 24 inches will have, which is 2 feet, will have a black arrow, so you can identify it very quickly. So um, when you get to 48, you should see the same thing again. However, every 16 inches, you should be able to see a little red square every 16 inches. So 16, 32, 48 will have a little square also. That reason why our studs, remember the definition, the terms we looked at earlier, we found out what a stud is. Studs are usually installed every 16 inches. So what you see in this picture is actually a stud. It's a stud, or studs. There's 2 of them, and they are 16 inches on center. From the center of one stud to the center of the other stud is 16 inches, and they all would be the same way, unless it's at the end of a wall. Then whatever in the wall, whatever is left over would be the difference. But everything from that point will be 16 inches. Remember that in construction, everything is usually built 24 or 30, or 24 or 16 inches on center. Now, every 19.2 inches is marked with a small black diamond. And you can see it right there, right there. And here's the reason with a small black diamond. See, 19.2 inches spacing on center is an alternative, less common use for spacing schemes for low-bearing walls um, and for special joists. So just in case if you build that way or architect want to build that way, it's there to help identify those spaces very quickly. You can look at it and be able to make marks extremely fast. Lay your tape on a let's say a joist or a top plate. You can just use your carpenter's pencil and mark it very quickly without physically trying to measure everything as marked for you already. Same thing like the 16 is marked for you, or 32, or every 16 inches on center, or every 24 on center. It will be marked. So again, we see this. This is a ruler. It's nice how they make it easy for you to identify certain things. The red mark and the black number set allows for the user to consider the measurement as the total number of inches or as feet in inches. So you can look at it's 14 inches, which is the same thing as 1 foot and 2 inches. So if you're looking at a ruler, somebody say, well, give me 1 foot and 2 inches. You don't have to guess it or add in your head. You can just look at the tape and put a mark right there. Uh, Same thing if it's 2 feet and 2 inches, or 2 feet and 4 inches, or 2 feet and 6 inches, or 10 feet and 6 inches. You will be able to look at your measuring tape and be able to put it there. Or if they give you the exact number in inches, you can find it also. Alrighty, let's read some of these questions. We'll work them out together. Now, it says the English ruler is used by people who use the blank. The blank. From your reading, of course, to get the right answer, you're going to have to read the chapter and go through it. So hopefully you read through it before you answer the questions, because I'm going to give you the answer. So here it is. The English ruler is used by people who use the inch pound system. In other words, in America, we use inches, we use pounds, and that is basically the 10, the base 10 system. That's metric. The base 100, that's still metric, or the metric system. All three of the top ones are the metric system. The English system uses pounds and inches as and ounces and things like that. We don't use liters, we don't use centimeters, we don't use meters or milliliters, or anything like that. We use ounces, pounds, or inches, and feet as our measurement. The next question says English metric measuring tapes commonly comes in blank lengths. Again, you need to read your book. Hopefully you did. And the most common measuring tapes that you're going to find others too, but the most common is actually 16 and 25. The 16, if you got to measure something smaller than 20 inches, that 16 is really handy because it's smaller. You can clip them to your belt real quick and be able to use it. But if you're using something a lot longer, of course, the 25 is something you have. So most carpenters or tradesmen will have both. It would be feet. So it would be 16 feet and 25 feet, not 16 meters or 25 meters or yards. It would be in feet, 16 feet and 25 feet. Okay, lengths of wood or steel that usually support floors, ceilings, or a roof are called, and I kind of mentioned that in the very beginning, about measuring out things and how we use our measuring tape to measure those. And the answer is joists. Joists, lengths of wood or steel that usually support floors, ceilings, or a roof are called joists. Joists. The studs basically holding up actually the joists. Alrighty. Next question. Walls that carry a sufficient amount of weight and or provide necessary structural support are called blank. Walls that carry a sufficient amount of weight and or provide necessary structural support are called load bearing. Load bearing. Load bearing is the amount of what it is actually uh, the supporting wall that is supporting something above it. It may be in the center of the house, and where the joists is actually laying on top of. So in other words, you take that wall, like load-bearing wall down, your ceiling going to fall in, or your floor is going to fall in, because if it's supporting your joists, there's nothing there to hold it up. So it must have something, a beam. Sometimes the beam is your load-bearing. Um, in other words, if they put a I-beam up or use some type of support to support it by a low-bearing wall, certainly that can do it for you. That can hold it. So is load-bearing again. Next question. Metric-only tapes are commonly outside of the United States. Is that true or false? And the answer is, if you read the book, you should get the answer. And it is true because we don't use it very often. You can find combination tapes that is both metric and or rulers that is metric and also um, American English scales. But typically to find a complete metric one, it is kind of difficult to get that.